Sahana bhavatu, sahano bhunaktu, saha viryam karavavai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great enthusiasm. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So there are a few questions that have been sent to me, but I'll also give you the opportunity to ask any questions. I'll mute my microphone, and then we'll see, possibly we can weave the answers together. Good. Go ahead.
It's regarding Enneagram. I don't know if it's fine if I make a question now, but are we wearing mask every time, and all of us, including you, including all the monks or all the gurus, or I mean, yeah, if we wear mask, a different mask every time during our whole life? Yeah, this is.
So in answer to that question, there's actually a whole video presentation on it that has been published quite recently, delivered in London to a group on that subject. But I'll try to answer it briefly during our session here.
Yes, I watched the video. That's why I asked the question, because yes, I heard that we wear different masks and we can change the mask, and behind the mask is like ourselves. But my question is always we wear different masks, or if there is a moment that we don't wear any mask at all.
Okay. That's also in line with the question, which goes like this. Sri Ramakrishna told M that images in temples are embodied consciousness. At the same time, in Christianity, yes, I may as well read this one out. So I'll read all the questions out. At the same time, in Christianity, there are many stories about images which were like living reality. In Montserrat, with the Virgin who was moving, and also in Brittany with an image of Saint Anne, which was always moving to a certain place. Then he says, recently a Jesuit priest told us he was not believing those stories. He was certainly believing many other things around them, but not the fact that the statue could move by itself. And then the question is like this: what is the best way to understand these stories? And then the second part is, if God is everything and that we are moved by him only, as some theologians say, every single person will go to heaven, and what is going on here is of no importance. It's the play of God with himself. And then there's an addition to that question. Then there's another question that comes in here, and the answer would be almost similar to in both of them. So all three questions about the mask and about the images and about this next question, we'll see if we can weave the answer in together. So Ramki asks this: the word understanding nature has been used in multiple ways. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, it said that based on one's nature, the duties had been chosen, sadhyam, swadharma, swadbhava, etc. All of these are applicable to duties. Duties imply that there's something intrinsic in us to make that duty happen. And then he goes on, Swami Vivekananda has used it in many places. In the lecture, Muhammad says, the greatest religion is to be true to your own nature. Have faith in yourselves. I'm going to stop there and extend the question and answer as I go on. What do we understand by nature? So let's put it in the language of the questions that are put. is nature the mask? And if it's the mask, is there a cosmic mask going on and an individual mask? Or are these things different? So that's the one approach. Another approach can be that when we talk about nature, are we talking about our nature? Are we talking about a universal nature? And that also is valid because it's used in that sense also. And then another aspect of this is underneath everything, behind the mask, behind nature, what we call nature, which we need to define still, is there a real nature that doesn't change? Now you see, Sri Ramakrishna gives a very useful parable story, and I'll paraphrase it a little bit. There was a lioness in trouble. She was in a river, and the river was flooding, and she was about to die, but she was also about to give birth. She gave birth to a lion cub. You can say lion, tiger, the stories vary. And this orphan lion cub was stuck on the side, and in the vicinity there were goats which were grazing. And the goats took compassion on this lion cub and brought it up as their own. And so the lion cub, not understanding anything different, would have thought that it was a goat, bleated like a goat, fed vegetarian diet, and roamed along with the goat herd. After some years, the lion cub, of course, was convinced that it was a goat. Now, there was a hungry lion at some point who came along, saw the herd of goats, and as is the nature of a lion, it wants to go and fill its belly. As you know, in the early mornings in the wild, let us say in Africa, for example, if you are a grazing animal and if you are a lion, you'll both wake up in the morning and the lion will be hungry and the grazing animal will have to be in a position to run as a result. Animals view us sometimes as food, and we view them as curiosities in safari parks. Anyway, the lion attacks, gets a goat, because that is the natural food for the lion. Lion is a carnivore. You and I can't eat meat in the raw state. We haven't got the teeth for it. And then as this was happening, he saw this shivering creature, this lion cub, and recognized it's a lion actually. And curiosity took hold of the lion and said, addressed the lion cub, "Who are you? What are you doing in these circumstances, bleating like a goat, poor thing?" And halteringly, the lion cub asserted, "I am a goat. As far as my memory is concerned, I've always been a goat." And the lion then takes the lion cub by the scruff of the neck and drags him to the river. And he said, "You are like me. You are one of my species. You're a lion. If you don't believe it, look in the water. Look at me, look at you, see, same thing." Still the lion cub wouldn't believe it. And then the last proof was the lion takes a piece of the meat and forces it down the lion cub's throat. And as soon as the lion cub feels the natural food, its own carnivorous nourishment that brings strength as opposed to the kind of biological structure of the goat, then he recognizes his own nature and raws. And so this story tells us something wonderful. It doesn't tell us anything about vegetarianism or meat eating or anything. That's not the moral of the story. It's very much the idea that our nature is obscured. Our real lion nature is obscured by something that we assume. We wrongly assume it. Sometimes we can call this a mask. That is a constructed way of hiding the truth unwittingly. No one decides deliberately that my nature is like this and I'm going to hide it. Everyone assumes from birth, and we say even before that we are individual beings living in a world where we have to struggle against unfair odds. We have several options. We can struggle, we can fight, we can run away. Of course, on a national, international level, this is warfare. But the wiser people find a different remedy, and the different remedy will be in love itself. They'll find a different formula. The formula is based on the capacity to stand outside all the changing circumstances that we collectively call nature and stand in a poised state of equilibrium. Now, the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is very useful in making this distinction in the language of there is a field of experience and a knower. Kshetra and Kshetrajna is how it's described. And then what is nature? Well, nature is the field, and everything within it that describes the content of the field. It implies to the individual field of the human person. It applies to the cosmic field of life. The difficulty is in the English language. We use the word nature for all these three things. For our own intrinsic real nature that doesn't move, namely the knower, and also for the field of knowledge, the known. And three things are necessary to form this relationship. There must be some perceiving entity, and of course it might be a physical thing like the body, an object has something that is perceived, or some mental ideas like emotions. Anything that comes and goes is in the realm of the field of knowledge simply because it is the objective realm that can be observed by an independent perceiver. They're called a knower. So the knower of the field is there, and it persists. It persists as the unchanging witness of all the changes, external and internal. And in order to save the confusion of the English language, we can call it the knower, we can call it the witness, we can call it the thinker, but the collective term recognized is Purusha. This is the yogic language, Purusha. Upanishads call it Atman, and there's every reason for using these two terms. The Atman is purely self. In other words, my nature as the ultimate quintessential self. And then there is another aspect, and that is myself that is assumed to be part of nature, and my outlet for it, my relationship with it, is through a mask. The mask is carefully constructed, and that mask tells us about our individuality as much as anything else, our individual approach to life, but also tells us about our swadharma, also tells us about how we should deal with life in such a way that we contribute positively toward it in a unique way. In which case, the mask is something very useful. Again, we can use alternative terms. Instead of saying mask, we can say our avenue for expressing our individual capacity and skills. And these are comprised of two components. One is called guna, and one is called karma. Guna is an inherited set of tendencies, because these ancient sages didn't view things in a linear way. They saw things in a circular way. And the year dot when you are born is part of the cycle. And the cycle continues. And this continuation of the cycle, technically called samsara, is also called nature, but let's not confuse the terms. We put it clearly under the label of either the field or prakriti. Prakriti is the technical term for nature in a collective sense. But are we different from it? No, because this nature has in its turn three components. These are called gunas. These gunas we can see even in the physical realm. We can see it in the emotional and psychological realm. We can see it everywhere. Now, the mask is comprised of these three components, these three gunas. And the whole universe is comprised of these three gunas. And the whole psychological field of experience is these three gunas. Prakriti is comprised of three gunas. And it is an unmanifest thing. And yet it manifests. Now, the manifestation is not different from the original source of it. Now, we're purely talking of the realm of experience. So we can see that of the body and the mental scenes will comprise the field. The coordinating center is, in a sense, the ego. But the ego, too, is an object of perception. We can watch it. Sometimes it feels happy, sometimes it feels miserable, according to its reactions to circumstances. And when reactions are controlled, let us say, on scriptural lines or moral lines, that is cultivating something that is more than moral conscience. That's just maintenance. Something that is extra. In other words, it is comprising the most noble ideas, truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony, devoid of egocentricity. Then the witnessing consciousness judges the progress that is made. So when evolution from darkness to light has been, let us say, achieved, there's a feeling of satisfaction that wells up. That too forms part of the field of the knower. The Katha Upanishad gives us this. It tells us that the question is posed, having known the dissimilarity of the senses that originate separately as also their rising and setting, the discriminating man goes beyond grief. It's actually an answer to a question. What is the rising and falling and so on and so forth? In other words, when the sense is set, we call it sleep, then something else comes on. Is there something that is different from dharma and adharma and from time and space? The answer to the question comes there. Having known the dissimilarity of the senses, that is the sense of identity with the body, that originates separately as also their rising and setting in dream and dreamless sleep. So we have to expand a little bit of explanation. Subtle elements are there. This is a very fundamental understanding of the Vedanta philosophy. They are invisible creative waves and they split into two poles, as it were. And on one side, they evolve into all sounds, and the other into all types of listening devices, humanly ears. And the other sense organs work on the same principle. They're a different form from one another in their structure and their functions, but they're also different from their knower, the self, which is our true nature. So when we talk about nature, we have to bracket it. That is true nature, knower, Atman, also Purusha. Why Purusha? Because it is the indweller, as it were, of a city. And although it's an indweller, it's not confined to the city. It is not limited. It pervades everywhere. And then the next thing that we should note is this phrase, rising and setting. It refers to the fact that our whole experience is within the waking world. And the instruments also within that register and that disappear in a dream. And then the dream and waking state give place to a peaceful, homogeneous state that we call deep sleep. Usually we ignore that state. We don't try to find out what significance there may be in this freely given daily lesson. Because the lesson is that the whole of the universe is working in this same way. What we call the universe is a cosmic waking state. What we call the subtle part of it is called a dream state, cosmic dream state. And then that goes into a potentiality. Now we can put, for convenience sake, a ruler of these three states, Vishwa, that is that same manifesting entity ruling the waking state, that manifesting element ruling the state of dream, and this we call the cosmic mind, Hiranyagarbha. And then what about dreamless sleep? A potentiality. Does the whole universe have that same potentiality? Yes, it does. Nothing is happening. These three gunas are in an equilibrium. And when sattva comes up, we call this cosmic mind. And when more combinations take place, we call this the subtle elements. And they all condense as our waking world. So the Bhagavad Gita that is being referred to makes no direct reference to these three states. This we have to get from the Upanishads. But you see, the Katha Upanishad, which is very much related to the Bhagavad Gita, touches on this topic. It wants us to realize the great all-pervading self through which we perceive the objects of this dream and waking states. And we perceive it through a carefully constructed thing. Let's call it a mask. So anyway, if you want further details, of course, about these three states, which is a very, very profound and very, very logically conclusive approach, then we have to look at the entire Upanishad of the Mandukya Upanishad, which deals entirely with this problem. And otherwise, we have relevant sections of the Prashna Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and so on. But in the Katha Upanishad itself, the full glory of the individual self is indicated by the expression contained in the original question, the Lord of the past and the future. And it's repeated in order to stress its importance. The same valuable ground is covered in the Gita, where it says, "Know me as the knower of the field in all the fields." In other words, there are no individual knowers of the field. It looks like that from our waking state. And when the mind is fairly pure, we can stand back, as it were, and discern internally that we are basically consciousness itself. This is our nature, described as the kingdom of heaven that is within, described as the internal spirit, as opposed to the psyche, sometimes described as soul. These terms can be hugely confusing. So we have to be very clear to use a number of clarifying terms to encapsulate what we mean. So the internal instrument called the mind has no spatial limits. It has no final termination in time. And it can also, of course, cause pain, and very often does. And that's the condition that we're finding ourselves always in. But the ordinary person finds that the complex, the body-mind complex, is a source of slavery or bondage. In struggles, we struggle to make ourselves free. All right. In other words, the mask that we are using to facilitate the glory of our function is being identified as, this is me. So in answer to the question, do we all have masks? Yes. does everybody know that we have a mask as separate from us? No. Do those who are realized understand it? Yes. For this reason, can they use it? Yes. The other people suffer from a compulsion that says, I am the mask. In other words, I am the field, or I am the object. Instead of saying, I am the knower, I am the subject. I am the one that expresses the glory of this divinity through the media of the mask. This mask we can reduce to one word, that is ego. When we are attached to it, we call it egoism. It's a big obstacle. But when we are free from it, it is simply ego, a faculty that we have, that we can use to become an open channel for divine grace to flow. And therein lies the difference. So this 13th chapter tells us very clearly that this distinction, and also tells us what is the nature, in other words, the different component parts of this field. So it mentions it like this. Mahabhutanya amkaro buddhye avyuktam evacha indriyana dashekam cha panchache drinji indriya, you merge this cha, triya gocharaha. The 5 great elements. What are the 5 great elements? Well, these are the elements of that we see that correspond to the 5 senses, and their source is subtle. This subtlety is the great elements. Then there is this egoism, there is this intellect. There's the unmanifest, the 10 sense organs, the one mind, the 5 objects of the senses. Now, this is simply a summary of a more detailed description put out by the Sankhyas of 23, 24 different cosmic principles. In order to understand this clearly, I normally have a whiteboard that tells you this, that I can write on. Let us start off with pure being and consciousness, the absolute. Now, the Atman is also Brahman. The quintessential source of me is the same as the universal one. It's just we use different terms for convenience sake. So 3 principles in the Vedanta philosophy are there. There is only one existence, we call it Brahman. It is infinite, it's undivided, it is pure consciousness, it is pure existence. When we discover it is also pure bliss. It is also infinite. It has no finite boundaries. Is this different? Is this a creator God? Is this a transcendent version of it? Not exactly. You see, we only have these 3 options, and I mentioned it in previous talks, that nothing made everything out of nothing, or that something made everything out of nothing, or something made everything from itself. If that's the case, then whatever is manifested as what we call nature, prakriti, is actually fundamentally one and the same as the original source, just manifested in different ways. How is it manifested? We have to put in time, we have to put in space, we have to have the components of a grand mistake. This mistake we also call nature, because in this particular description of it, we call it Maya. So we have Prakriti, we have Maya as synonymous terms. They're made from the 3 gunas, we can call it Triguna. There's another term because it describes that there are 3 potential components there. And nature is eternal. It runs along those eternal lines. So we now should pick up if we're talking the Bhagavad Gita, we should pick up the 15th chapter, very short chapter, only about 20 verses. And there, if we haven't grasped this thing, we have to use some allegories. We have to use some metaphors. What metaphor is being used? The metaphor is that the universe is presented as a special kind of tree, a sacred tree, a peepal tree, Peepul, a certain type of tree with certain shaped leaves, designated something that is sacred. In other words, what we call the whole universe, what we call nature, what we call objective existence, what we call the field, what we call whose characteristic is one of change and of appearance and disappearance, who is subject to time and space and movement and function. We can view it as a kind of tree, and every tree has a root. Now we can imagine the tree to be inverted, and the branches are continually spreading below the root. And the hymns, in other words, all the wisdom that are contained, which are infused with the sacredness, they act along with scriptures as leaves. We now have a picture. In other words, all knowledge is there. Now, this is not the only tradition that has these particular metaphorical images. Because don't forget, in Judeo-Christianity, we have the Genesis tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is equivalent to the same thing. In fact, the Sanskrit term is Ashwata, and it suggests something whose existence today is uncertain. It changes. What was today is not what was yesterday, and what will not be necessary tomorrow. And the Sanskrit word for tree has a root. And the meaning of the root, vriksha, means something that we can cut down. And so the particular tree can be cut down only by what? The determined use of the weapon of non-attachment. All of spirituality has to be non-attachment. I'm going to introduce another question here, and we'll try and summarize, knit all this together at some point. If God is everything, and that we are moved by him only, as some theologians say, every single person will go to heaven. What is going on here is of no importance. It is the play of God with himself. This is true because there's only one thing. This is a play, which we here describe metaphorically as a tree. And yes, it can be cut down though. But we can't just resign and say, well, since it's all one being, why should we bother? What's the need for any practice at all? No, the attachment has to be reduced and finally the whole attachment has to be done away with. This is called detachment, cutting down this tree. So there could be a misinterpretation that the only purpose of every science of religion or spirituality is to help people to feel good only. No, this is a position that is leveled by neo-atheists at the moment. Some will say, well, we don't agree with God, we don't believe in a God, we don't believe in a deity, normally mischaracterized as an extra cosmic creator God. That is something making everything out of nothing. We don't go along with that. So they'll say, well, there's some value in religion because it makes us feel good. And there's every evidence that that is true. So, no, we have to make a spiritual effort. We won't realize these things just by sitting and pontificating on these issues, not at all. We have to make some effort. Now, part of this effort will be what is called bhakti yoga. In fact, it's the easiest thing. That is love of God. It is Ramakrishna who began by having an idea that this Supreme can appear as various forms. And then he realized the formless. And so in his own experience, there was no dichotomy, that there was the same entity that had form and was also formless. He poses this as a question to many disciples coming to him. He realizes the truth of both, and then he chooses to remain in the realm, if you will, of forms. But he had the facility of entering into the formless at will, and we should also adopt the same kinds of things. Now, part of these forms are put in a concrete way. Supposing you cannot imagine something that is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Supposing we have to have some definite form, it will always be an anthropomorphic form. We don't know anything outside of the human concept of the highest development that nature has evolved. Nature is always in our favor. It provides us with an urging lesson in life. It urges us forward. Nature is our mother to tutor, urging us along in the sense of Prakriti. And so there are various figures, paintings, statues. This we call technically, we can call it symbols. We'll use English terms, symbols and forms. It can be quite controversial. Anyway, Ramakrishna has told M that images in temples are embodied consciousness. Why? Because once they are worshipped and infused with the deity, and ritualism offering food and everything that we would use at a royal court, all worship will be royal worship then. And a temple will not be to facilitate marriages and so on, or particular ritualistic things that belong in secular life. No, halls and so on are used for this. The whole concept of a temple in Hinduism is that it is a palace, a royal palace, and the indweller is the king. Same concept with the human. This is the royal 11-gated city in which, in the very heart, the Upanishads will tell us for visualization purposes of the size of a thumb. At the very heart will be the royal personages, without which the rest doesn't work. Same thing on a temple level, same thing on a cosmic level. That is simply, nature is similar to something like a web, a spider's web. You can poke it, nothing will happen. When you advance toward the sentient aspect of it called spider, it will run. In this same way, the web is dependent on the spider. In fact, the web comes from the spider, not requiring a Mrs. Spider to manufacture it. It takes it, it projects it, it withdraws it. This is a wonderful, wonderful analogy used in the Upanishads themselves. So, if you take that, the sentient part of us, the source, the one that is a life giver, is this intrinsic, fundamental, quintessential nature that we call Purusha. Prakriti is dependent on it. And so without that Purusha, Prakriti does not work. In fact, without the Purusha, Prakriti does not exist. And so we have this whole world which we call samsara, or the field, or nature, and the entire world process is there, and it's coming from a cosmic mind that is called a golden womb, Hiranyagarbha. And from there down to a clump of grass, everything in the changing world falls within this category. And so, what is spiritual life? It is learning to stay attuned to this Lord and its glory. And in doing this, you rise above the relative existence in this very life. You rise above nature and its threefold components. Rising above means we can use it also. It becomes useful to us. Now, if it is true that we can infuse through worship, through devotion, through love, just as when we see a photograph of a loved one, it evokes the internal memory of what it represents. This infusion is present more tangibly in the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition through iconography, icons, where the icon itself is worshipped in a sacred way. And so all these images are embodied consciousness. If we view it this way, the devotee will see nothing else. The avenue that leads toward it becomes the same with it. And so therefore, it is no surprise when the devotee sees this as a living, breathing thing. Whether it is in Christianity, whether it is in Hinduism, it will be the same thing, dependent on the level of devotion that a person has. And if you say that there are stories of things moving and so on and so forth, and that people are skeptical about it, that is good, because there are many circumstances where things can be explained as natural phenomena. And as thinking beings, we should be rationally orientated as well. We should not take things on hearsay. We should investigate, is there some simple explanation? I'll give you an example. Some years ago, there was a great buzz about statues of Ganesha drinking milk. But on investigation, it was found that the porous nature of the rock, of the stone, was sufficient to create a capillary action. And when this was discovered, is it that we should stick to this idea, a miracle has happened and Ganesha is there drinking it? But in another way, we can say Ganesha is being worshipped as consciousness itself, the ultimate. In fact, Ganesha represents Omkara, represents this Hiranyagarbha, this cosmic mind. And so worshipping that, no doubt, creates a set of vibrations, holy vibrations, no doubt. And would it be any surprise if the Lord takes off what we offer? Now, normally we understand that it is only stone which is there, that the real infusion is inward, it's within it, not on the outside. And so I think we should have this level of skepticism as well. And I think I have probably answered the one set of questions. Let me go back to this idea of mask. Let me go back to the questioner who's confused about nature. But I think I have covered it fairly well. But let's go on with the question. He says, also in Mission of Vedanta, that's lectures given by Swami Purnananda, Swami Purnananda says that the way to dehypnotize as teach yourselves, teach everyone his real nature, that is the presence of the Atman. And then my insertion. Call upon the sleeping soul. Yes, the soul seems to be sleeping, this Atman seems to be sleeping. And see how it awakes, as it were, we have to add. Power will come, glory will come, goodness will come, purity will come, everything that is excellent will come when this sleeping soul, some may say even sleeping giant, is roused to self-conscious activity because it expresses itself through the mental field. Then again, another quotation taken from Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga collection, The Secret of Work. Then he takes a different meaning. The whole of nature is for the soul. Substitute, please. Prakriti is therefore jiva. Jiva means the Atman that has got itself confused with its individual nature of body-mind complex, or what we call mask. The whole of nature is for the soul, not the soul for nature. Nature is our sweet nurse. The very reason of nature's existence is for the education of the soul, yes. Prakriti is there, and it's for the soul. It has no other meaning. It is there because the soul must have knowledge, and through knowledge, free itself. If we remember this always, we shall never be attached to what we call Prakriti, nature. We shall show that Prakriti is a book in which we are to read, and that when we have gained the required knowledge, the book is of no more value to us. See, it's like a superstructure in a building. It's like a scaffolding. It is useful to build the building. But once the building is finished, then we can abandon the scaffolding itself. All modifications that we see, they proceed from the imperishable source. And it's like a tree from a seed, using that same metaphor. And that imperishable is also called Purusha. So the source is only nature, the Lord's own power. The Lord himself is the supreme Purusha, what we call Purushottama. And since he and his glory form the central theme of many, many passages, and I will be quoting from the 15th chapter, a small chapter, then we can call this, as the 15th chapter describes it, the yoga of the Supreme Self, that is Purushottama Yoga, because it deals with this thing. Going back, we'll see in the Bhagavad Gita that chapter 10 says that he, the Lord, is seated in all beings. He is their beginning, their middle. He is also their end. That is the 30th stanza. Then he makes many more important statements in chapter 15 about this, because he makes one important statement after another, but the most telling one will be to do with the jiva. That the small portion, an eternal portion of myself, see? Tanamai vamso jiva loke jiva bhuttam sanatanaha manaha shashtani driyani prakritistani karsati. An eternal portion of myself, having become the embodied soul in the world of living beings, draws to itself the senses and the mind as a sixth, which are in Prakriti, nature. Well, I hope I have answered all three of these questions. If not, poke me some more and seek further clarification.
Thank you, Swami. I just need one clarification on this one. We shall know that nature is a book in which we are to read, and that when we have gained the required knowledge, the book is of no value. Which means that when we interact with the world, we use the discrimination to understand that the world is less real and there's something more real inside us. Is that what he meant?
Yes, so I'm sure you have a number of books. Would you confirm?
Yes.
Okay, so once you've read your book, what is the use of the book?
Only knowledge is there.
Well, you read the book, let's say you read it 6 times. Until you know every single word, what's the use of the book?
Okay.
Okay. So if nature is compared to a book where we learn everything and it's guiding us toward the reality, then there's no necessity for it. Same thing literally with a book called scripture. And the Bhagavad Gita will tell us, it's like all the Vedas are as much use when as a pond when there is a flood everywhere. So it's not that we think it's absolutely, continuously, and perpetually useful. There are some theological positions that declare that it is absolutely supreme. You see, if you take the Quran is everything. It's almost worshipped as Allah Himself. Of course, that position is denied, but that's the problem. You see, when people spoil or despoil the Quran, as has happened, I think, in Scandinavian countries, for foolish reasons, no doubt. But there's a big uproar. But it's a book, that's all. And the book is only telling us what it's like a car manual, You require a manual to understand the car, but for a mechanic, he doesn't require it. He knows what's wrong. The confusing thing is in this English use of the word nature, you see. A fundamental nature, if it is your fundamental nature, you can never change it. But if it is a fluctuating part that is called nature, not only can you change it, you must change it. So the fact that there's a mask doesn't mean to say it's fixed and cannot be changed. It's not our fundamental nature. If it was our fundamental nature, we have no hope of changing it. But we are separate from it, described as the knower and the field. I'm the knower of the field. The knower and the field are completely different and separate. And I am the knower in all the fields, says Krishna, representing for us the Supreme. Our fundamental nature, if you want to put it like this, is God nature. That's our fundamental nature. And you cannot have two natures. It's only the appearance of two natures. If the principle is there's only one thing, something that is Purusha, making everything out of itself, using the misguiding principles of gunas, namely hiding, projecting, and also revealing. The revealing part we require. Actually, all of it we require. But the most useful thing would be the revealing. How do we do it? By promoting that aspect of it. And that aspect of it is the free aspect within us, expressing itself without any attachment to the object, namely the mask and all the faculties. 24 cosmic principles are there. We start off with the absolute. Then the next question for any thinking person will be, how does the absolute, which is pure being, enter into becoming? A peculiar kind of causation is applied. An apparitional causation called vivarta that makes something look like something and deceives us nicely. So this is called collectively ignorance. Our understanding of nature, interpreting it as intrinsically part and parcel of us, is called technically ignorance. In fact, ignorance is failure to know a portion of myself has come, says Krishna. The attaching myself, entering into all the five senses, appearing as the five senses with the mind as the sixth. So what are these categories? We start off with the absolute. You can mentally draw an invisible line below that expresses itself as prakriti, potential nature, comprising three potential aspects of it. That erupts from time to time and becomes the cosmic mind, what we call personal God. Our devotion to this personal God will infuse objects with divinity. And then, having said that, we have to be careful not to be subject to blind faith, superstition, hearsay, etc. That then is a creative aspect. This creative aspect, which we call cosmic mind, cosmic Christ, cosmic Buddha, cosmic Ramakrishna, cosmic consciousness, whatever you wish to call it, manifests itself in creative ways as primordial elements that mix themselves up eventually, and the final mix presents itself as this so-called world. But this world is only within a small field of waking experience. Another world exists, our dream experience, and another world which is simply potential. What we call the waking state is our conventional view of nature and the world. What we call dream is really the realm of the cosmic mind and the subtle elements playing. That is why possibilities are endless in a dream. And a deep sleep, where no dream is there, no time, no space, no causality, this is an area of creative potentiality that we call prakriti. Prakriti manifests itself then as the subtle and further condenses as our waking world. Now, our interpretation of it is quite the opposite of how it is. We take the waking world as our primary reality. This is the trick. And we take the dream as some foreign thing that, although it has the same spatial, temporal construction and criteria, we dismiss it just as a dream, instead of finding in it the voice of God. And then we come to dreamless sleep, where we rest in the divine, until there's another cosmos of our own, a microcosmos, a waking dream, dreamless sleep, waking dream, dreamless sleep, and there's an observer of it all. If you have three balls, blue, red, yellow, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I'm clearly not any of these things. I'm the eternal witness, I'm the eternal knower, and that is my true nature. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, thank you, Swami. It was very clear for me. It was. I thought it was a challenge for you to answer. Thank you very much for all you did. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
But I have another question. I
yes.
would have, because you say dreams are the voice of God, and I had a dream, and I found an explanation, but I don't know how it could be, the voice of God. It's just my mind, it could, my mind is anxious. Yeah, I mean, how is it, how God come in a very not ordinary dream, but a dream of everyday's life? How God is here.
Well, this is, you have to study Jungian psychology a little bit to understand that more. And even Freud said that the unconscious mind is the royal road, or dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. The difference between Freud and Jung was prepared to bring in a certain element of spirituality, although he couldn't declare it openly. You see, what we call the mind is a very complex thing. And we can divide it into many sections. There's the sense section, the internal world of senses and forms and names. Names. The external world is the forms, the internal world, the names. All is nama rupa. But then you see there's another world which doesn't have any of these things. So now all people who emphasize the value of dreams know how to interpret them, namely the American Indians who have dream catchers, the Aboriginal Australians, and the Aboriginal Africans. They all know what their dreams mean. And Carl Jung has made various classifications, types of dreams, to assist somebody in interpreting what is problematic. Now we can put it in this way. We have various problems. When we fall asleep, so to speak, we have a loving being that happily digests our food, no matter what nonsense we put into it. And then solves all our problems in dreams and wakes us up in the morning for the next day of stupid thinking. So this is the beautiful, beautiful source of life that we have sitting behind us, infusing us with life. And we are in no way thankful to it. We should be. That thankfulness is called devotion and worship. So you'll find in the Bible many references to dreams, Jacob's ladder, and so on and so forth. So the ancient mystics and prophets, they never dismissed dreams at all. That's not to say we should interpret every dream. There are some dreams that are significant and dreams which hold an obvious interpretation. But we have a dream interpretation course that I give. It's not the most important thing that we do. But if you're interested, we can make a workshop, probably next year, I would think. This year I'm fairly booked up.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you very much. Indeed.
Okay, all good. Okay, we leave it at that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. And thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you, Swamiji.